The time is coming, during 1945, when after Germany is defeated, armies must go east.
We used to be called the Forgotten Army, because it was. Never hardly mentioned Burma.
You know, frightened to bloody death. We all were. You never knew what was going to happen.
I couldn't tell anybody where I was and what I was doing, least of all my parents.
Looking at the green hills of Scotland as we sailed down the Clyde, I thought, well, will we ever see this again?
By May 1945, the war in Europe was over. Hitler and the Nazis were defeated. But on the other side of the world, the fighting was far from finished.
The Japanese took over the whole area. My father was one of their many British prisoners.
We left civilization and became into another world for almost 4 years.
I was floating in the Pacific with one wingtip of my plane disappearing into a wave.
You didn't want to be left behind. If you're going to get wounded, you want to die.
For 4 days and 4 nights I marched alone.
They bayoneted every single patient. They killed everyone.
It was not just a fight against a brutal enemy, but a battle against sickness and disease, through jungles and across deserts. The human cost was huge.
In front of the convoy through Hiroshima, it's just devastation, just nothing.
The BBC has been gathering first-hand accounts from our surviving veterans, most now aged more than 100 years old.
I lost a lot of friends. I still see them now. Every night I go to bed.
These are their stories, their voices preserved for future generations, their memories of how the war in the East changed their lives forever. VE Day, the 8th of May 1945. Neighbours and strangers across the country danced together in victory. But not everyone could celebrate.
On 2 legs I'd be firmer, but I've left one back in Burma. One eye's made of glass, 'cause the other one stuck up the Khyber Pass. I'm one of Mountbatten's broken boys, the 14th Army. I'm one of Mountbatten's broken boys.
George Durrant was one of 1 million British and Commonwealth troops, the 14th Army, who'd been fighting against Japan in Burma, now known as Myanmar.
It was a rough country. You can't compare the European and the Pacific War to it. It was a unique place, really.
Had you heard anything about victory in Europe?
Nothing at all. And we felt really lost, you know, forgotten. Yeah.
We were part of a jungle warfare division. And on VE Day, I remember we had a hell of a party in Rawalpindi. And everyone got pretty pissed. Yeah.
I was drafted to HMS Enterprise. It was the end of the war, VE Day, so we give 3 cheers. I think we had a tot of rum. And we went to Singapore because the war was still on.
I remember my brother writing to me, everybody here is climbing lampposts everywhere and putting out flags. and yet we were still destined to be fighting the Japanese.
What did it matter to us if the German war started or finished or went under? We were thousands of miles away.
It was more than a decade before, in the 1930s, when Japan aggressively expanded its empire across Southeast Asia, seeking land, resources and control. It became a formal ally of Nazi Germany in 1940 and threatened the colonial possessions of the British Empire.
I volunteered for the Indian Army because my father had served in India.
The Empire was a very strong motive force in those days. We had Empire Day every year.
My father came from Lancashire, and then we went to Malaya, and that was a lovely time because we were free.
The English are not going to defend it. They just put down arms when the Japanese came. So somebody has to defend India. I'm not just fighting for democracy now, I'm fighting for India. That's when I joined the army.
Well, I had no choice. I was conscripted. I was in the Home Guard first at Clapham Junction, and then I got called up in the army.
I was sent up to London and interviewed by an intelligence corps officer, and he said, here's a railway warrant, get yourself to Bletchley. Ever heard of Bletchley?
Betty would spend 4 years at Bletchley Park, the top secret code-breaking centre, where she would excel at gathering intercepted messages.
I was transferred over to the new Block F, which was known as the Burma Road, and that was all to do with the Japanese side of things.
The HMS Implacable was built and governed in the city of Glasgow, 100 yards along from the place where I was born. So I always felt knowing my ship was Clyde built, it would be safe enough.
I joined up with 200 other young men, all from Borstalls in Wolverhampton. It was quite cold weather, but we never suffered. We lived in Nissen huts, and in the middle of the hut was a metal stove. And because they could pick locks, they picked the locks of the Colour Sergeant's fuel store, so I learnt a lot from them.
The largest convoy ever to leave Britain brings a great armed host to the shores of India.
They put me on a ship called SS Stratheden. I shall never forget that ship's name as long as I live. And we got to Bombay.
There were 220 volunteer aid detachment nurses on it. We'd all volunteered to go to India. Friendships were struck up, especially in the dark. But I'm told there were 9 engagements when the ship had landed at Bombay.
My first command was the mortar platoon, which was about 60 soldiers, half Hindu, half Muslim, and about 40 mules. I'd never seen a mule before in my life.
Stepping out into this new world was so strange. Seeing people and bullock carts were being chased all along the street.
I speak one or two rather ridiculous phrases. Sarisat Bhaji, 7:30. A Bundabus Crow, make all the arrangements. They were useful phrases like that.
On the 7th of December 1941, Japan attacked an American naval base in Hawaii, Pearl Harbor. 21 warships of the US Pacific Fleet were sunk or damaged, and nearly 2,500 servicemen and women were killed. At the same time, Japanese forces attacked Allied territories in Southeast Asia, including British Malaya. Jim Wren was a 21-year-old Royal Marine from Sussex. Days after the Pearl Harbor attack, he was on board the battle cruiser HMS Repulse, part of a British naval force in the South China Sea off Malaya.
I was down on the mess deck, having a cup of tea. All of a sudden the alarm went, aircraft. Well, the bomb dropped right behind me. But fortunate for me, the bomb went down 3 decks before it exploded, you see.
The noise and the rattle of gunfire was terrific. The torpedo bombers come in. I was on the stern aircraft gun. There was a terrific explosion in the aft part of the ship. All of a sudden, she just rolled over and was gone. And it was a case of every man for himself then, I'm afraid.
How long were you in the water for? Do you remember?
I was shooting a good hour and a half, 2 hours, because there was 500 odd men on the repulse were lost, and 300 something on the Prince of Wales. They were comrades of mine. I'll never forget them.
Jim was rescued and taken to Singapore, still held by the British. The sinking of the Repulse and the Prince of Wales was a huge blow for Britain and the Prime Minister, Winston Churchill, but a greater humiliation was soon to follow.
We then were sent up to Malaya, which the Japs at that time had captured the majority of the top of Malaya towards Thailand. It was a terrible experience up there. We ourselves had to find our way back, which we did to defend Singapore.
Olga Henderson was 9 years old when Malaya was invaded by Japanese forces, who quickly fought their way south, overcoming inadequate British defence.
The army, they came.
The British Army?
Yes, and he just ran up the steps when he said, "You've got half an hour to pick up what you can."
Olga's family fled, hoping they would be safer in Singapore.
There was so much bombing that Mum and Dad had to put us on the floor and cover us with mattresses because of the shrapnel.
By the middle of February 1942, Singapore was about to fall.
We started to be shelled. One of our officers had half his face blown away, killed him instantly, and I had splinters from these shells in my leg.
There was thousands of these women, children, men, nationals, all scrambling to get away.
I was sent with others to collect some rations, and we got to one of these warehouses.
It was that eerie sort of quiet, you know. The Japanese as an officer came, knocked on the door. Of course, we were all shut up at the back. And he just said, "We would like you to go and register at the Raffles Hotel."
And whilst I was in there, the Japs overran the place, and we were taken out at bayonet point.
I see it now as plain as anything. All the dead bodies, you had to climb over them, and we came to this bridge, and every spike on the bridge was a head. They'd cut the heads off and put them all along the bridge.
There was a machine gun set up to shoot us, and I remember standing there, didn't care too damned whether they shot me or no at that time, because we were so exhausted.
And of course we went and we never came home again. And that was our start of our time with the Japs.
And I heard all these noises of shouting. And it was the Japanese all shouting out their victory call. And obviously an agreement had been reached where the prisoners were to be left. And they took that machine gun away, and that's why I'm sitting here today.
Cyril's life had been spared by the British surrender, but he was now a prisoner of the Japanese, as was Olga, her family, and Jim Wren. As well as Singapore, Malaya was lost, as was Hong Kong and Rangoon, the capital of Burma. Japan then pushed retreating British and Allied forces northwards, back towards India. The fighting was brutal.
When we went into Burma, it was a march of 7 days, and it was a killer, absolute killer. We did 20 miles a day, so hot that we decided we would march at night.
It wasn't like Tarzan, that wasn't the kind of jungle it was. But most of it was bush, bamboo, and we had to cut the way out through to get the gunners in it and everything else. And they had to supply us by airplane.
I was the youngest officer in the troop. We were the most forward gun troop in the division. Nobody in front of us except the enemy.
You gave orders as clearly as you could, made sure that the men knew what to do in the event of gunfire. Go to earth, seek the enemy, and kill him before he kills you.
The heat was so really unbearable, there was no escape. And of course there were snakes everywhere. When you were putting on your boots, you had to double check.
The main enemy was dysentery and malaria and all kinds of diseases. That's where we was losing and most people, and not the Japs. It wasn't very nice in the jungle.
The only good thing was when the monsoon came, we'd strip off down to our underpants and go outside and stand in the pouring rain. It was beautiful to feel all that rain bouncing down all over your body.
There wasn't a sound, not the sound of a beast, not the sound of a bird, nothing. Commanding man in the jungle was a bit scary because you could be cut down by an efficient ambush at any time.
The Japanese used to shout, "Hello, we're watching you," all kinds of things to frighten you, which of course it didn't make any difference. And I'm telling you this, that I was real proud of the infantry there. They were real tough guys.
Their history has captured the imagination of the Allied world. Here they are in close-up for the first time in newsreels. The Chindits.
The Chindits were a special force of soldiers, British, Indian, Gurkha, West African and Burmese, fighting behind enemy lines.
So the rule was, before we went in, your purpose in there is to kill or be killed.
This was guerrilla warfare lasting for months at a time, with no heavy weapons and little chance of relief.
When I went in, I was 11 stone. I was now 8 stone 4, a skeleton. I had no energy, I had no fight, I had no spark. If you were walking wounded, you carried on. If none of those things were possible, you were left. I was left with 4 days' rations and ammunition. I lay in a chong with water in it and I couldn't move. And I found I had a spark. I wasn't dead, I wasn't immobile. And I got up, and for 4 days and 4 nights I marched alone. Until I reached our men. I shall never ever forget any one of those men. And I'm delighted to have had the honour of being called a Chindit.
supply problems are harder than have been encountered before in any campaign. The hot, steaming climate is physically exhausting enough, quite apart from all the extra reserves of energy which fighting demands.
The Burma campaign was, by 1943, a war of frustration and failure.
In a country of mountain and jungle and malaria, these British troops are enduring and overcoming hardships and hazards far beyond anything we can imagine here in Britain.
But by the end of the year, there'd been a change. New leadership, new strategy, and even optimism.
The Japanese is a tough enemy, and much must be done before he will admit defeat.
Bill Slim became the commander of the 14th Army. Training, tactics and morale improved, and Slim made sure his men got what they needed. But in return, he insisted there could be no more retreats. Very soon, the men of the 14th Army would know exactly what this meant.
In the Arakan, the Japanese idea they would break through our defence and invade India. On the 4th of February 1944, the Japanese began. They got in behind us.
Robin Rowland was a 21-year-old officer about to fight in a decisive moment of the Burma campaign in Arakan. 2 weeks of desperate combat with the enemy, at times just yards away. It became known as the Battle of the Admin Box.
We were cut off, but we were defending. They attacked all our positions, one after the other. Their attacks were pretty well suicidal. The Japanese found a field dressing station of ours, and they give you some kind of the cruelty of the Japanese. They bayoneted every single patient, or 31 of them. They killed every one of the patients in that field hospital.
Hundreds of Allied troops had been killed, but many more Japanese soldiers were dead. Robin and his Commonwealth comrades had been supplied by airdrops, but the Japanese tactics left their own troops cut off and starving. For the first time in the Burma campaign, the enemy had been countered and defeated. There were further victories in the spring and summer of 1944. Around the city of Imphal in northeastern India and at Kohima, the Japanese invasion was being driven back into Burma by some of the most vicious fighting of the war. Japan was now in retreat.
From the four corners of the earth they come. They join the people of the other colonies and dominions in the great march towards a free world.
None of these victories would have been possible without the young men and women of the Commonwealth. The 14th Army was the most multicultural, multi-faith army ever assembled. A force of more than 1 million people from 20 nations, speaking 100 different languages.
So there were West African division there were Australians, there were British, obviously, and Gurkhas. Grim as it was for me the happiest time because the camaraderie was quite amazing.
The blood is in me. Asian blood is in the family. We are warriors.
I was very happy that I was being sent on active service, but it turned out to be a garrison battalion. It was like being in Dad's army. The commanding officer, he said, the happiest moment of my life would be when I get out of this hellhole of a country. I couldn't help it. I said, you're quite right, sir. That would be my happiest moment too. And there was pin drop silence. So I saluted and left the mess.
Yavar's desire to defend India led him to a new post as a frontline combat cameraman.
It was a scene of hell that I saw there. Japanese grotesque lying on the ground, some of them with the harakiri still in the stomach.
Ferocious brutal, not a joke, the enemy. When he gets you, he will kill you.
If I could find a Japanese, I would have killed him. I'm ashamed to admit that's what war does. I was told to hate the Japanese.
So there was blood everywhere. It was a terrible sight. It's not good for human eyes. And you see people dying, screaming. Oh, God. War is not a good thing.
Joseph was one of more than 90,000 African soldiers who fought against the Japanese in Burma. Britons in the 14th Army numbered around 100,000. But by 1945, well over 750,000 Indians were serving in the region. These men were part of the largest volunteer army in history.
Without the Indian Army, the war against Japan would have been lost, no question about it.
British and Indian troops opened the assault on Rangoon with a thrust up the Rangoon River.
Then we went down and invaded Rangoon in South Burma, and of course it was entirely different raiding there compared with going into France.
Rangoon was a hell of a bloody mess, there's no doubt about it. There were obviously Japs around about, we didn't know where they were. And we were going to look for them.
The first sight we had of Japanese disaster was the smell of human flesh. Handkerchief up to nose. Every few meters or so were small bundles of dead Japanese lying beside the jungle track with their bellies swollen in the most grotesque way, indicating death by starvation.
Before we went in, we said, if you see them, shoot. No bloody taking prisoners, because they won't take us prisoners. They'll try and kill us if they see us.
We went from ditch to ditch, up and over, up and over, up and over. And my signaller, he got up and then got hit. We're just right in the middle of nowhere with this group of people in this hut. Do not say a thing. We just spent the night in silence.
Stuart's signaller had died from his wounds.
I said to myself, this is something I wasn't trained for, because they had to make some sort of gesture for the dead boy. The infantry had dug a huge pit, because they'd lost 5, and I'd just lost 1, and put a box with his name and everything in it. It was a survival box. We all got a survival box, which contains fishing net, hook, water purifier, and some sweets, butterscotch.
The triumphant campaign in Burma has brought everlasting glory to our fighting men. Today, except for a few isolated pockets, the whole of this vast territory has been reconquered, and the Japanese myth of invincibility in the jungle exploded forever.
Even though the war was now turning against the Japanese, tens of thousands of Allied forces were still their prisoner, kept in the most awful conditions. Many of them in labour camps here in Thailand, along the route of the infamous Thai-Burma Railway.
The Japanese wanted to build this railway through Thailand, several hundred miles through virgin country, through jungle, through rocks, and we were the means of them doing it. And the Japanese were a race at that time of cruel, sadistic types of people.
The physical treatment they would receive from them, being beaten for, to us, they were non-existent. We were just being beaten as slaves.
This cutting through the rock along the route of the Death Railway was excavated entirely by forced labour, British and other prisoners. Several thousand tons of rock cut mostly by hand, day after day.
The Japanese somehow picked up the word speed, and they would shout "Speedo, Speedo" all the time. And we would be on these ropes chanting "Ichi ni sanshi rokus si hachi kuju." That was Japanese up to 10, and you'd do that. There was no barbed wire fences or anything like that round the camp, because there was no way could you escape from there. Although at the camp where I was, there was 3 who did try. They were captured. They were made to dig their own graves, and they were bayoneted in their own graves.
People dying every day, sometimes 2 or 3 a day. And it was dreadful, yeah, dreadful.
At least 100,000 people died during the building of this railway, including 7,000 British prisoners, as well as Australians, Dutch, Chinese and Americans. More than 80,000 Malay and Burmese people lost their lives, forced into labour by the Japanese.
Why did I survive and not the chap next to me? We were thousands of miles away, and we ourselves felt it. We were far from home. How are we going to get out of this mess?
Cyril became dangerously ill with infections in his leg.
The Australian medics carried me over to a little hut. Without anaesthetic, he cut up my leg, and he pulled out a great big tendon like that. Of course, that saved my life. The men in there, one next to me, he was covered with these ulcers. Terrible he was. I remember him dying next to me. You never give up because you want to survive. It's as simple as that. You always had in the back of your mind that sometime you'll got to be free.
Olga Henderson and her family were still being kept as prisoners in Singapore.
So what were the kind of conditions you were living in? Where were you sleeping?
On the floor, on the concrete floor. You couldn't describe the filth. There was 118 of us in a hut with 1 toilet. So you know what the conditions were like.
Jim Wren had been taken to Sumatra and imprisoned.
Well, don't get messing with a guard, because if you do, you're in trouble. They would cut you down for, even if you failed to salute them or bow to them.
A fruit fell from the tree and it broke in half. And my brother picked it up straight to his mouth. Peter had to be punished because he took something without permission, and they whipped him.
They whipped him?
Whipped him.
Japanese soldiers in the army, unlike our own army, were different as chalk to cheese. If they didn't do as they were told, were stood to attention and were bashed unconscious. So how could we hope for anything other than the sort of treatment which they gave themselves? They were merciless people.
We all had to have a badge, and it was your name and your name in Japanese, and you had to wear that all the time. So they used to come round at night, so some of the younger ones, to examine this badge. You should see what they were after, and of course Mum used to make sure she was always up as soon as she heard them, to make sure they didn't interfere us.
It's ruined my life in a sense, to see men die like that. You expect to die when you're fighting a war, but not to perish in those circumstances. Terrible.
By 1945, while the Allies fought through Burma and across the occupied islands in the Pacific, American and British naval fleets made their way towards Japan.
The Battle of Okinawa was a battle fought within 362 miles of the Japanese mainland.
We were doing air-sea rescue work behind the aircraft carriers, so that when the fighter bombers came back from doing their damage to the Japanese mainland, if they crash landed, they just pushed them off the deck, pilot and all, and our job was to pick the pilot out of the plane before it sank.
Kamikazes, suicide pilots, Japan's growing desperation in this fanatical sacrifice of pilots and aircraft.
Our job was to stop the kamikazes and that coming over while the landing was going on, you know. The American Marines and all that landing there.
But Bob and the crew aboard HMS Indefatigable were unable to stop a Japanese suicide attack on their own warship.
7:30 in the morning it was, we got hit. Straight and coming down, you know, right in the middle of the flight deck. Oh, you dive for cover everywhere, you know. And we never had any tin helmets on the flight deck. You had a little cotton thing on your head, you know. And then the old medics come in, bandage you all up and the rest of it. I just done my arms there and on my leg, you know. And that was the worst one because, well, I've had to wear stockings ever since, you know. Keep my blood going. I got these pressure stockings I have to wear.
On the aircraft carrier HMS Formidable, Christopher Cartledge took off to raid Japanese defences near Tokyo.
Our job was to go in very low, just skimming the water, and then just have a go at any planes you saw outside the hangars. I fired at one or two planes actually just out there on the ground. And then I saw the hangar to my left. So I wheeled round, firing into I was right sort of almost touching the ground, firing into the hangar. My plane suddenly started going all over the place. I'd been hit by anti-aircraft fire. I radioed and I said to them, I can't, I've been hit, I'm going to try and return back to the fleet. And I decided that it'd be so dangerous to try a deck landing, I would go up to the safe height for jumping out of the parachute, which is 5,000 feet. And what you have to do is to pull a special lever that ejects the hood. Well, I pulled this lever and it just jammed, it didn't eject the hood. I was trapped in it. So I realised I've got to try a deck landing. And so I started just circling around Formidable. Every now and again I turned back to see if I could get that hood off. And I must have been losing height if I did that. The last time I did that, when I was facing backwards, I hit the sea. I felt this terrific braking feeling. I went unconscious. The next thing was, I was about a few seconds later, I came to, and I was floating in the Pacific, and I could see the wingtip, with one wingtip of my plane disappearing into a wave. Mates of mine who'd been watching from the distance said he reckoned I was a goner when it went in. It seemed to explode or something. I think it cartwheeled with one wheel going down, but I don't know. I was okay, except for a few cuts. I had a cut here. The doctor put a stitch in here.
By July 1945, bombardments on Japan were becoming more intense. The Allies demanded an unconditional surrender. Japan refused and prepared to resist a mainland invasion.
Only yesterday they have been told of the true power of the weapon they are to carry. 31,000 feet over Hiroshima, the bomb is dropped.
The atom bomb, oh yeah. We were out at sea then when that dropped. Hiroshima first and then Nagasaki. This actually saved my life, I'm quite sure, because we were intent on making a landing on the Japanese mainland, which we knew would have been so ferocious.
It was a terrible invention, really, but I think it won the war for us. I don't think we're certain of winning it any other way.
Though in front of the convoy through Hiroshima, and it was just devastation, just nothing there. A few little wooden huts people had tried to put up, and most of them that we could see were wearing kind of masks around their faces.
The Japanese had caused so many atrocities. We really thought, well, it's either them or us. And we'd been fighting so long, so we were quite satisfied with the situation.
You know, at the time you're preoccupied with yourself, I suppose, but I felt that, I mean, a whole lot of innocent people in Japan, and they must have had a dreadful time.
It's almost indescribable because the roads were all up and down like this. The trees that were left, or the electric poles, were all bent right over, right, almost down at the ground, and you could see 2 or 3 miles across the city, what was left of the city, which was just piles of rubbish.
Days after a second bomb had been dropped on Nagasaki on the 9th of August, Emperor Hirohito of Japan announced his country's surrender.
This plane came over, and as it came over, all this flittering stuff came down, and that was the notice to say the end of the war had come.
Suddenly they said we were to parade around these huts, and there on a mound stood this Japanese commandant and informed us that the Great East Asia War had finished.
We found lots of Japanese bodies dead because they'd thrown themselves into the water. Quite a lot of them had jewellery on. We were trying to get the jewels off the fingers. And another thing we did, we dug all the gold teeth out. Can you see what we were doing? No feeling at all, nothing.
Japanese officer come to speak to us. He just said in his gabble, the Japanese war is over, you know, and stepped down and he was gone. Whether he thought we were going to maul him, I don't know. But they just all disappeared.
Now Sergeant Robert Bell of Grey Street, Burnley, captured at Singapore while serving with the Manchester Regiment.
I'm a Britisher that was liberated from that prison camp. I was taken prisoner in Singapore, from where I was sent to Thailand and compelled to help build a railway, during which time at least 50% of the people that were sent there died of cholera, dysentery, diphtheria and malnutrition.
It was a marvellous moment to realise that you had survived all that you had seen and gone through for nearly 4 years. Yeah.
Missouri, Admiral Halsey's mighty flagship, in which the actual surrender was to be signed later.
We went on to Tokyo Bay with the USS Missouri to sign the surrender, you know, into Japan.
We then had the job of going round all the little islets and things around Japan, telling the suicide boats that the war was over. But we was carrying a Japanese naval officer and a Japanese army officer. We were flying the Nippon flag, the Royal Navy flag, and also the Union Jack.
We were on our way, and the captain gave out, anybody on the flight decks, look to the port side, you'll see King George V flying the signal, cease hostilities against the Japanese. And of course everybody's cheering, you know, and all that.
Our ship was immediately sent to Hong Kong. All of the ship's company were given rifles and ammunition, sent ashore, 5 or 6 in a group, to round up every Japanese man, woman and child on Hong Kong.
They didn't know the war was over, so they came charging out at us, and we were praying they were going to see, you know, the flags. Otherwise we would have been blown clean out of the water.
My boss called me and said, you are going to Washington. That was to continue my work in the Japanese section. I did exactly the same thing, actually, in the Pentagon. And I was the only member of the ATS to be posted out there.
They said, come on, Redson, come up. You're leaving tomorrow. You're going to Singapore. So we've got a dinner for you tonight.
Eisenhower was coming back from Europe, and here was the great man himself. So we downed tools and went out to see him.
They gave us a little cheer when we went in, and when we looked round the Tower Hotel, it was decorated with yellow balloons all the way round.
He looked rather miserable, actually. I think he was missing Europe. But he drove round and gave people the opportunity to see him.
VJ80, I was in Peterborough. I had some relations there, and we burned an effigy in the street of Hirohito. I think he was the Japanese Prime Minister or some such thing. Yes, that was in Peterborough. I remember that well.
VJ Day, I remember we planted a tree. The district commissioner, who was an Indian, planted a tree, and we played tennis. Yeah.
We said, you know, we just finished a war with the Japanese. Where in the hell do you get balloons from? You know, there's nothing in the shops. And someone came up to me and said, they're not balloons, they're condoms, yes.
We laid in Singapore quite a while, and we ended up bringing back prisoners of war, which was terrible, terrible. They were so thin, and they couldn't eat. We gave them spare clothes. Cigarettes was what they liked.
It was in Singapore 3 years earlier that Carey Outram, Pat Outram's father, had been captured.
He had a very good tenor voice. Before the war, he'd sung locally in musicals like Rosemary, The Desert Song. Used to sing at home quite a bit with the piano. We just didn't know if we'd see him again or not, because obviously a lot of deaths among the prisoners in the Far East, and if he had been a prisoner, I wish it had been Germany rather than Thailand, but that was it.
And it was here, at what used to be the Chung Kai camp, that Carey Outram was the senior officer looking after his men as they were put to work on the Thai-Burma Railway.
Well, I think they lost so many officers and men that, you know, they wouldn't have been viable as a regiment. They really starved, a lot of them, I think, or there were tropical illnesses that they could get, and it was a very tough experience for them.
Carey Outram took a huge risk to preserve his prison memories.
He kept a diary secretly, which of course was very dangerous, and they had so many burials of prisoners who died that he was able to bury the sections of it in graves which he kept a little map. So when they were liberated, he went and dug up the diary and brought it back with him.
In September 1945, Carey came home to Lancashire.
And he was brought back by somebody who wanted to sort of stay and talk, and I thought, my mother really wants to see my father on his own. They don't want this rather chatty chap all the time. But anyway, they got him home. Went back to playing the piano and singing the songs he'd sung before.
When Carey Outram died in 1993, his local newspaper published a letter from a fellow veteran. On many occasions, I witnessed his brutal beatings, he wrote, for his steadfast refusal to send sick men out to work on the railway. There are many ex-POWs, including myself, who owe their survival to Colonel Outram. Can you forgive the Japanese for what happened to you?
I can't forget. The views never go away. I should go to the grave with them views in mind.
How does one forgive any nation that starts a war? I don't know.
At that time, of course, one just simply hated people who did that sort of thing. Actually, you wouldn't have no feeling for them, would you? In fact, if you could have had a rifle, you'd have shot the lot. Yeah.
I don't know the answer to that question. Nowadays, okay, quite happy with the Japs. But I don't think during the war there was any softness, if that's the right word.
Well, I suppose they've got to forgive. There's no point in keeping on about it. It's history now, and you just got to forget it and think yourself lucky that you were the one of the ones that escaped.
I was selected to be part of the British occupation forces in Japan. And I saw the Japanese, and I fell in love with them. Wonderful people. I cannot tell you how they were gentle and so courteous.
He never wanted to have anything to do with anything Japanese again. And we had a cousin who was half Japanese, and she came on a visit to England, thinking all her English relations would be so pleased to see her. And he went away to Scotland, I think, until she'd gone. And so poor cousin Nellie was terribly generous, always giving us very nice presents. I think she did visit us, but my father wasn't there.
Far sooner than they dared to hope, they were setting foot in Britain again, a moment they'd dreamed about for years.
When we arrived back at Liverpool, I've never seen so many women lying in the docks. And when we walked off the boat, they gave us a cup of tea and a cake or a biscuit and really put their arm round us and welcomed us.
When I came back, I said, I'm not going to be told what to do anymore. You do what you want to do and not what other people tell you. And
I remember looking out of the train window and seeing some mist covering our woods and thinking, oh, how wonderfully cool.
I got this first train down from Victoria to my hometown in Sussex. In those days, they didn't lock the back doors or anything, you know. And I just walked in and I was like, hello, Mum. Of course, she jumped up out the chair and She said, oh, oh, coming home, and your lovely Margaret's here as well. And that's the first time I've ever seen a Margaret in that 5 years. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Gosh, it's strange when you trying to imagine it, you can't, you know.
How you coped with it all. I think you must be an incredibly strong character.
Well, I think all of us were really, we had to, so you just had to cope.
I don't think I ever talked about it to anyone. No one was particularly interested. I've learned more about the war from the computer and about my squadron than I ever knew when I was there.
Whatever you could do in the way of survival was the order of the day for everybody, really. Either you were lucky or you're unlucky. I was lucky.
I don't know. Used to be on your mind. I used to wake up dreaming. Not so bad now, it's only when something like this comes up. It sort of blows back to you, know.
I was watching the news. There was a little boy, and he was standing with his hand out. And that's what we were doing, just to have something to eat. And I thought, what have we done? What are we doing to the world? Nothing's changed. No. No, I'm all right. Yes.
Bear in mind, I was only 18 years of age. You didn't realise the danger you were in. It was only an adventure. As far as I was concerned, it was really an adventure because we didn't know what the war was about.
It changed my life completely. It trained me from being very green to being quite, I got back a lot of confidence in what to do, and confidence to command men, confidence to do what appeared to me to be right.
What is more important to me, I saw the world. Not only did I see the world, I saw other people, how they lived. All this experience I would never have had if I had still been stuck in my little place down in London doing advertising.
You couldn't possibly say you enjoyed the war, and we didn't, because we were always worried about my father, the reports coming out of the Far East. But it stimulated you in a way, I think, and all being part of a very big effort was rather an unusual experience, to say the least.
Oh, I did make it home, and I told Jean before I left her, I said, I'll come back. I did, but I was changed inside.